Hello, my name is Mary Ellen King, President of the Austin Bar Association. Thank you for joining us today for the first episode of the Stop the Stigma podcast. Through this podcast, we hope to bring awareness to mental illness and substance abuse in the legal profession and hopefully stop the stigma surrounding those discussions. Today, we have Eileen Lawrence joining us. Eileen, welcome.
Thank you.
So my first question is, what made you decide you wanted to share your story with us?
Well, so first of all, I want to say thank you to the Austin Bar for doing this. This is so important. And I'm sure we've all seen statistics about how prevalent depression and anxiety and substance abuse are in the legal profession. So I'm so glad that the Austin Bar is making this a priority. I started suffering from depression, I would say about 7 years ago. That's when it really hit me. And I've suffered from anxiety my whole life, to the extent that I didn't realize that I had anxiety. It was just normal until I started taking antidepressants. And the first thing I felt was not really from depression, but all of a sudden my teeth weren't clenched and I didn't feel like I needed to bite my nails all the time. And I realized it was like when you get that first glasses prescription. I'd been living with anxiety my whole life without realizing it. So one of the really hard things about suffering from depression and anxiety is you already feel disconnected. You're already hearing these lies that depression tells you in the voice of your own thoughts. And then we layer on top of that, because our culture is so happiness driven. So on top of the depression or the anxiety or both, we layer on top of that shame. I'm not doing this right. I'm not living right. And loneliness. Because of that shame, you're afraid to talk about it. And it kind of snowballs. You're, piling on. So I felt like as I started to, I'm not going to say I'm free from depression and anxiety. They still come and visit me sometimes. But as I started to emerge and I really hit a low point, which we may talk about later, and as I came back from that, I realized that I could do something not about fixing people's depression and anxiety, but about the shame and the loneliness. And I feel like it really is about stopping the stigma. If we thought about depression and anxiety the way we think about allergies, we're sitting around a table sniffing because our noses are running because, the cedar is doing whatever the cedar does. We would all be like, ugh, allergies, but there's not that layer of shame and loneliness, which just compounds how difficult depression and anxiety can be. So I've made a point on my social media to talk about my struggles with mental health, because I know that's where a lot of people are looking. And if all you're seeing on your Facebook or your Instagram is smiling, happy people posting the best parts of their lives, you start to believe that that's the reality for everyone else.
And it's not.
It's really not. It's really not. So I try to be more honest on social media, which sometimes means that my Facebook posts are not that fun to read. And I've also started a Substack newsletter that I call Notes from the Mind Field. So I talk more in depth there about what I've experienced, or when I'm in the middle of something, what people call the messy middle. Mm-hmm. I like to write from that place, just to let people know you're not alone. You're not alone.
So how many years have you been practicing law?
I graduated from law school in 2003. I did take about a 2-year hiatus to be a stay-at-home mom. So whatever that math is.
So it wasn't until 7 years ago you started or feeling like you were having some issues. Can you talk a little bit more about what were you experiencing then, and how did it impact your practice, if at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I feel like my experience with depression is maybe a little bit different from a lot of practicing attorneys, because I love practicing law. I loved being an attorney. And sure, there are some days, sometimes some issues that were difficult, but I had found a second perfect job. My first perfect job was teaching at UNC. Love teaching. My second perfect job was writing ordinances for the city of Dallas, which sounds boring, but it was wonderful. I was learning so much about different areas of law, and I had wonderful colleagues. And at home, I had, when I started at the city of Dallas, I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I know that some moms are meant to be stay-at-home moms and they love it. I felt like I questioned everything about being a mom. I felt like I didn't know if I was doing the right thing ever. Well, about 2 years into practicing at the city of Dallas, my husband at the time asked me to consider stepping away from work to be a stay-at-home mom. And he was a practicing physician. So he was pretty busy and he was making much better money than I was. So I did. So I stepped away. And at the same time, we moved out into the suburbs. So I had this shift from I'm doing something I feel good at. I have these colleagues surrounding me, a network, a support system, to moving to a new neighborhood, a new city where I don't know anyone. And what I'm doing all day is momming, which I do not feel qualified to do. And I felt very alone. And I knew, like, there was a part of me that was like, oh, this is going to be tough. So I started seeing a therapist just to kind of be proactive. And I started running. And I found an online running program for moms called Train Like a Mother. So I could have a kind of virtual support system. And I started training for my first 10K. I ran my first 10K on my 40th birthday. I started training for a half marathon. Like 2 weeks before the race, I was doing a practice run and I tweaked my knee. I could barely drag myself home. And I didn't mention, during this time of being a stay-at-home mom, I had started drinking wine in the evenings. And it was one of those things where it was like life was hard. By 5 o'clock, I needed a little help. So I have a glass of wine. And as the months went on, that one glass turned into 2 glasses. So hurt my knee, realized that I felt like everything was crashing down. I didn't have an outlet. I wasn't getting those special brain chemical boosts that you get from exercise. And I went to my therapist and I said, I think I need some help. The interesting thing about seeing a therapist and maybe starting to feel depressed and feeling that mental health stigma is it is very hard to be honest with your therapist if you feel that shame. So I had not been very open with her about how bad I was feeling. And she was like, well, why don't you talk to your primary care physician and, see what you can do. So just making that appointment, saying the words, I think I might be depressed, was really hard. It was really hard. And I just had to force myself to make the appointment. I'm going to force myself to open my mouth and say those words. And she gave me this depression screening questionnaire. I know there's a technical term for it. I don't remember what it is. But basically, it's like, how have you felt in the past 2 weeks? And it asks kind of specific questions. And as I answered those questions, I was like, I am bombing this test. Or maybe I'm like getting an A+ on this test because I definitely have depression. And it wasn't until I took that test that I realized how bad it was.
It wasn't, I mean, it's normal, but it wasn't you were definitely not on your centered point, I guess you would say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, now that I know what depression feels like, I can say until I hit that period of my life, I had never experienced depression. I'd been sad, I'd had some ups and downs, but I'd never been at that point.
And what are some of the feelings you have? Like, can you explain to us, like, how did you recognize what that was? Or what were some of the questions that you had to answer that helped you recognize that it was, in fact, depression?
I think, like, when I'm thinking about that questionnaire, and it was things like, how often during the past 2 weeks have you felt hopeless? Oh, well, every day. How often during the past few weeks have you felt sad? Every day. How often over the past 2 weeks have your feelings made it difficult for you to do what you need to do? Every day.
Did you go back into the practice of law, or how long after that did you go back into the practice of law?
So it wasn't until I left my marriage that I went back to work. So we'd moved to the suburbs. Then my then husband decided to move us to North Dakota, which is like, moving to the suburbs was one thing, and then moving to Fargo, North Dakota, where neither of us had any family, was a completely different experience. And it was like, well, the medications were not enough. And that was where I really hit my lowest point. So, after all of that, I tried several different medications, I don't know exactly what they call these. It wasn't like I attempted suicide, but I almost attempted suicide. Finally found a psychiatrist who helped me to realize that I needed to change my circumstances. So left my husband, we moved back to Texas. And then I was a single mom with 2 kids. So I needed to work, and I could work. I wanted to work. So I did. I did finally go back to work. At that time, when we first moved back, so my ex and I have shared custody, and part of our divorce agreement was that he had to move back too. But he was stuck in North Dakota for a few months finishing out his contract. So I was like 24/7 single mom with the kids. So I was looking for a part-time job. I interviewed at a law firm that did government work, which, related to my experience. They were looking for a full-time attorney. And I said, I can't. I was very honest about it. I can't do that right now. Maybe in the future I can. Right now I can only do part-time. And they agreed to let me come on part-time.
Talk to me a little bit about today in your life. How do you prioritize your mental health? And I think you talked about the messy middles. What do you do when you get into the messy middles now?
There are a few things that I have kind of been my go-tos, my mainstays. And I want to emphasize that these are things that I've learned. I can't just do them when I'm struggling. I have to do them all the time. One of them is exercise. I don't run very much anymore because my knee still gives me problems. And I need accountability. I've learned that about myself. If I say, I'll just go for a walk every morning, it's going to happen sometimes. So what's worked for me is I found a personal trainer who works out of her home, and I meet with her 3 times a week. And if I don't go, I know I'm letting her down, So I'm using that people pleasing to my advantage. So that's helped, having that accountability. 3 times a week, I work out for 30 minutes. And then I've tried some other things. Like recently I started kickboxing.
Oh, that sounds fun.
There's a place near my house, which is good because one of the things I'm working on with therapy is getting comfortable with anger, which is a whole other thing. But I figured if I could do something that was like safe fighting that it might help me feel a little more comfortable with it. So, but finding a way where I have a community or some accountability with exercise. And I know there's lots of science and research on why exercise is good for your mental health. I can say 100% that is true for me. Very much so. It's like, I need it. I need it. The other thing is, and this may sound a little weird, but cold water. And I have this water bottle. I'm going to show my water bottle. So I got this on Amazon. It shows like it's supposed to keep you on track with your hours and how much you're drinking. I don't usually do every ounce of water that I'm supposed to do, but just drinking cold water. Again, I know there's science and research about cold and how that can help your, I don't know how it works, but that has really been a helpful thing to me. And again, it's just something I do every day. Therapy. And something I want to say about, well, I have a couple of things I want to say about therapy. One, it can be really challenging to find a therapist. And if you're an attorney, we have TLAP, the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. And one of the things that TLAP offers is they can help you find a therapist. So yay.
The other thing I want to add is that the Austin Bar Association has the Mac Kid Fund. So if you're having financial difficulties, it's strictly confidential, TLAP and the Austin Mac Kid Fund. And the Mac Kid Fund will help pay for your therapy for several sessions. So there's lots of ways through the bar associations to find help confidentially and financial resources to get the help you need.
I feel like that's so important, especially because the second thing I want to say about therapy is you need to find a therapist that is a good fit for you. And having these resources available, the resources to find someone and to pay for someone, makes it so much easier, because I've had experiences with therapists. I'm not going to say they were bad therapists. They just weren't a good fit for me. And so finding a good therapist, one that's a good fit for you, is really, really important.
I think I said that before we started today, that I was with my therapist earlier this morning. I mean, I love her. Like she's walked with me through, and I'll share my story at some point on the podcast, but she's walked with me through some very, very hard times over the last 10 years. And now she's just more of a life coach. But, she checks me, and I share with her, my experiences, and this upset me. Is that normal?
Yes, right.
Is it normal for me to get mad about that? And she'd be like, yes, I would be mad about that too. Okay, thanks. But no, therapists are incredible resources on your good days and on your bad.
Yes, really. It's so true. For me, medication has also been helpful. Finding the right medication has taken some trial and error, which can be difficult too. And having a therapist and having a support system is so important while you're going through those ups and downs. The other thing that's been helpful for me is writing. I write poetry, and I've written a lot about my experiences, and that has been kind of a different kind of therapy, to write through those things.
Yeah, I noticed your last. I went to your Substack and subscribed.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll share information on her Substack with the podcast listeners in the comments. But one thing I noticed is you recently had a messy middle. Is that right? In July. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And are you still in the messy middle, or have you worked through it? And what are you doing to work through it if you're still there?
Yes. So I did have a messy middle. I would say it's just kind of cleared up in about the last 2 or 3 weeks. So for those who aren't familiar with the messy middle, what that means is I was doing I think of it like a war zone letter. Like, I am in the middle of a depressive episode, and this is what it feels like. And it was one of those things where, there were some external stressors, and then I was having some medication fluctuations, and It's hard. Every time it's hard. I remember the first time I felt depressed after leaving my marriage, because I thought, oh, well, I fixed it. I'm not going to get depressed again. And then when I did, I thought, oh no, what does this mean? I thought I've fixed everything and here I am depressed again. So every time it's gotten a little easier, but every time that depression comes back, there's a part of me that's like, oh no, I can't do this again. But again, having those supports in place and doing them when I'm feeling good helps. I will say there was a part towards the end of July where I couldn't work out. Like I just did not have the energy to exercise. It was like, I know this is good for me. I just can't do it. Like there are certain things I have to do. I have to keep working. I have to take care of my kids. But I couldn't make myself do the other stuff. And like I said, every time it's scary. And I went in and I talked to my therapist and I said, and every time it's still hard, it gets a little easier. But, she said, how are you doing? And she said, I don't know how she does this. She says this with no judgment. Like, how are you doing? And I said, I'm having a really hard time. And then it just started crying,
Been there.
Yes. And it's tough, but then there's this relief. Okay, I can get this off of my shoulders. I'm sharing it with somebody. And one thing she said was, okay, well, go home and talk. So I've gotten remarried. So I have husband 2.0. And she's like, have you talked to your husband about this? And I was like, no, because there's still that shame there. And she was like, okay, well, after we talked through a bunch of things, you have some homework. When you get home, you talk to your husband and tell him how you're doing. And I started crying again. It was like, I don't know how to do that. And she gave me some words. Here's a script to follow. So when I got home, and I feel like this is also part of the messiness and the being in the middle, is what you say and what you do are not going to be perfect. Mm-mm. It's not scripted. You're just kind of blurting out, doing your best. And that is enough.
Right.
That is okay. So I just said, I've got the depressed again. I said something like that. But that was, he needed to know. He knew there was something going on. And I was like, and I just need a hug. That's what I needed. And he's a good husband. So he gave me
you a hug. Good. I was going to ask that. Well, did he give a hug?
He did.
So talk to me a little bit about your job. Are you in a firm? Or are you a solo? What is your job like?
Yeah, so I did that part-time job for a while. And this is something we talked about a little bit before the podcast, is I feel like even though the firm was on board with me being part-time, my clients were not on board with me being part-time. And after a while, I thought, I can't be the attorney that I want to be in this practice area and the mom that I need to be to my kids. I should also add, although I know this was like way, way in the back, the person that I want to be just for me, because we're more than just our jobs and our kids. So I decided to work on a transition plan. And long story short, I now have my own estate planning firm. I opened it almost 4 years ago. So I'm my own boss. And it is the only way that I can imagine doing what I do and being the person I want to be, being the mom I want to be, being the wife I want to be, and being the attorney I want to be.
Can you talk to us about your self-care? I think you talked about therapy and exercise. Are there any other self-care practices that you engage in during your difficult times? I know for me, I suffer with anxiety, and I was telling my therapist today that one of the things I'd love to do is read.
Yes.
So do you have any other tips for self-care that people may use when they're experiencing difficult, messy middles?
Yes. So I love to read too. I discovered the Libby app recently where you can check out virtual books from your library. So I like to read like if I'm in bed and then listen when I'm in the car. So you can switch back and forth. I love it. The other thing that I have been working on, I feel like I'm still at like a remedial level, is breathing deeply and feeling into my body. Like, okay, like right now this is where I always feel it. Like at the pit of my stomach, there's a little tension. In my shoulders, there's a little tension. But just being aware of that and just kind of getting out of this and into the rest of me, just that, and just practicing it so that when you're in the messy middle, it's not so strange and foreign.
Right. It comes intuitively.
It does.
Yeah. So I have the same issue, but I do the whole breathing exercise too. Talking about apps, there's really good apps for it, or you can just find it on YouTube, just the calming breathing.
Yes.
The cycles. And it is incredible how much it can change the way you feel.
Mm-hmm.
What is the one thing you would change about society and the way they embrace or way it embraces mental health, if you could change one thing?
So like in my perfect world, what I said about talking about mental illness, like we talk about allergies or physical illness, if we could get to that point, I feel like it would make everything easier for any of us who experience depression, anxiety, substance issues, thoughts of suicide, any of that, because that stigma, that shame, and that feeling of loneliness just makes things so much worse.
Right. Because we need community.
We need community. Yeah. And I feel like when you're experiencing depression, and I wrote about this in my most recent newsletter, all of these connections that we have with other people that are so necessary. I mean, they're part of how we survived when we were, living in caves and running from tigers. Like, it's a really basic need for survival. But when you're feeling depressed, or when I'm feeling depressed, those connections all feel charged like electric shocks. And so you need other people to come in and help you. And so I think that's the other thing I would change. We ask people every day, how are you? And we ask it on a superficial level, and we're usually not expecting a real answer.
And we're usually not given a real answer.
And we're not giving a real answer because we're like, well, I can't dump all of this stuff on this person who's just trying to, be friendly. But if we would normalize having less superficial interactions with people we care about.
Right.
I mean, you don't want
a stranger on the street.
Exactly. But if you're talking to a friend or a work colleague, to ask those questions.
When you were talking earlier about therapy and you said, you started crying, and I thought, sometimes just going and talking about what I'm going through helps me so much.
Yes.
And gets me to a better place. Or sometimes it helps me find the solution to my problem.
Yes.
Myself, if I just talk about it. So it is true. I agree with that I wish people would be more open and willing to talk about it and to hear it and to be empathetic to it.
Yeah. And I feel like that hearing it also is really important. And I know this isn't exactly your question, but this is one of the things I wrote down that I feel like is really important.
It's your story.
So not just for people with depression or anxiety, but when someone comes to you with an uncomfortable feeling. So like if you reach out to a colleague, you're concerned about, how are you doing? It seems like things are a little off. And if they say to you, you know what, I'm having a really hard time. I'm feeling really down on myself. And if your response is, you have a great life. Everything is wonderful. You're making amazing money. Your clients love you. You're doing so great. And I feel like a lot of us would respond that way for a couple of reasons. One is because we're trying to be supportive and we think that's how to be supportive. The other one is we're not comfortable with feeling bad feelings. And so we want to just push that away as fast as we can. We do this with our kids too. If you have a kid who comes to you and says, I'm feeling nervous about the first day of school, how many of us are going to say,
it's going to be great.
Yeah, you're going to love your teachers. You get to see your friends,
Yeah.
because we get scared I mean, I think this is part of it, at least for me. We get scared of giving, feels like we're giving into those negative emotions. And again, something I've not perfected, something I'm still working on, but I feel like when I'm on the other side, what works best for me is if that colleague says, I'm having a really hard time, to approach them with compassion and without, this may sound weird, a little bit of curiosity. Tell me more about what's going on. That does sound really difficult.
Right. And I think we're bad as a society too to say, how can I help?
Yes.
But when you're going through a crisis and you're in the messy middle, you have no idea. I don't know. Help? What's that?
Yes.
So I tried to say, let's go have coffee, or what kind of, do you need me to come clean your house, or which I'm not very good at, but I'll still offer, watch the kids. You want to go take the kids swimming and we can talk or whatever. But yeah, I agree that is very important to recognize it, and to recognize that it is okay. We all have bad days. We all have messy middles. It may not be, clinically diagnosed as depression or anxiety or bipolar or whatever, but the same tools that you can use for all of that, all the tools you're talking now, work for bad days. If that's just what you want to call it, a bad day, that works too. I agree. And whether it be us facing, these mental health problems, even if it's not, it may be our family members.
Yes.
Just being able to talk about that too is extremely important.
Yes. Yes.
And then, I was at a bar leaders conference this past week, and we were in a session and asking, TLAP was in the session, actually. They were talking to us. I love to listen to TLAP anytime they talk. They will be coming on the podcast later, I should say. But that's one of the things you can always call TLAP, because they, as attorneys, and not only attorneys having a mental health crisis, but attorneys whose spouses or children or coworkers are having some sort of crisis and they don't know how to deal with it, or it's affecting them, you can call TLAP. They have lawyers and who are also licensed professional counselors and psychologists who can walk you through it. So all of that's very important. And again, talking about it.
Yes. I don't want to forget to mention this too. TLAP has a free 1-hour CLE on their website. So you go to their website. I think it's tlaphelps.org. And I think it's right at the top. It's called Just Ask. And it gives you kind of a script. It kind of coaches you through those conversations. So not only are you getting a free 1-hour of CLE, but also you're getting a really good tutorial on how to have those conversations.
Yes, I'll tell you this. If you don't have an hour to do the whole CLE and you really just need some help walking someone through it, there is an abbreviated version on there too. So that, if you're like, oh my gosh, my coworker's having a crisis, I need to be able to help them, I'm not sure what to do, they do have an option to have an abbreviated version, so you can do that.
Or just call them.
Right.
I've done that before. I was concerned about a colleague and called them, and it was quick. They got the information they needed. They were going to follow up with a colleague, and they said, we're not going to tell you what happens. It's going to be confidential, but yeah, so helpful.
Yes.
And then I also want to mention, if you're talking to someone who you're really concerned that they are going to self-harm, we have that national suicide hotline too. It's 988.
Yes. And it's very helpful. And that, not only will that hotline help the person who's going through a crisis and thoughts of suicide, it can also tell you how to help them.
Yes.
That's what's really important. What do you wish you had known then, back 7 years ago, that you know now that might have made your journey easier when all of this sort of, I don't know that it started 7 years ago, but you definitely named it 7 years ago, right? What do you know? What do you know now that you wish you had known then?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. Sometimes I do that exercise where I kind of go back to myself 7 years ago and, pretend that I'm talking to myself. What would I say? I feel like the number one thing would be and it's so confusing. Depression is a really good liar, and it speaks with your own voice. And if you're used to listening to that voice to tell you things like, oh, it's time to eat dinner, or, it's time to check my kid's homework, or I really need to make sure to shepherdize this case, or I need to make sure I prepare for that trial. It's the same voice, and it comes in the same way as the thoughts that say things like, you are doing a horrible job and no one loves you. And how do you learn to distinguish that? If you don't have the knowledge that that's how depression works, you just think, oh, well, this has to be true because it sounds like the true thing you've been listening to your whole life that's gotten you, to where you are. Have a better understanding of what depression feels like to be in depression. Even though, we all knew the stories of, I'm thinking about Robin Williams, this amazing comedian who seemed like
so happy. He
was so happy. And then you think, well, what happened? The discussion around that, and still when things happen like this in the media, it's, it's this huge mystery. We don't know how this happened. If there was a more honest discussion of how depression really impacts you, what it feels like to be in it, that would have been really helpful to me.
Right. And then I think it sounds like when you finally, you did take the jump to go to the doctor, but it took a while, right?
It did. Right. It really did. And I think part of that too is the alcohol. Because, you start to, we're lawyers. We drink when we're, in law school. It's part of the social lubricant, right? But then I started to use it because I was feeling uncomfortable and unhappy. And I felt like that gave me some relief. Well, what it did was numb me to what was going on.
Right. You weren't addressing the underlying problem. You're only masking it.
Exactly.
Right. And then, of course, alcohol adds to the depression. It's just a spiral sort of out of control.
It is.
So what advice would you give young attorneys who are coming into this profession, who, may be facing a mental health crisis now or will at some point in their future?
Yeah. So I would say the primary takeaway is you are not alone. You are not the only person to walk this walk. There are many of us who have been in your shoes or who are in your shoes. And it's impossible to say, don't feel shame. Just, I'm going to snap my fingers and your shame will go away. But I hope that knowing that you're not alone would help with that. And also recognize how lucky, well, that's going to sound horrible to a depressed person. You're really lucky. But we have TLAP. We do have these resources that are confidential. You don't even have to say who you are. Just call them and say, this is what I'm going through. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, if you can find a real, authentic friend, maybe you have a family member who you think would be responsive, send me an email. I'll talk to you.
On the daily, I've had my own personal crisis and I'm very vocal about it. And literally in the last week, I have had 2 people reach out to me just privately and then say thank you. I just listen because, and I was like, I've been there and they know I've been there. And that's incredible. So, so you're saying they could, if they don't know where else to go, they can contact you.
Send me an email.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I put that on Facebook too when I write about stuff. Send me a message. I'm happy to talk to you. I'm not going to judge you. Sometimes you just need someone to listen and understand, and I'm happy to do that.
Right. I'll give Brene Brown a plug here. Have you ever read Brene Brown?
Yes.
Okay. I know. I just love her. Okay. So one of her sayings, and I'm probably going to mess this up, but you'll get the gist of it, is that the one thing we don't need when we're going through our personal struggle is shame for being human.
Yes.
It's just human.
It's
It's messy,
human.
right? And
It
so
is.
it's so important not to shame people when they go through their struggles and make sure that they know it's okay.
It is. And don't believe the hype. I mean, we walk around presenting our best selves on social media. We're using I guess people use filters to make themselves look better on Facebook. I don't know. I don't know how to do that. But it's not just that. We're presenting what we want the world to see, the happy things, the proud moments. But that is not the whole story for anyone.
Well, I think it's true too. Society puts lawyers in such an elevated space, which sometimes I joke, I'm like, I don't know why they do that, but they do, right? And so we're afraid to say, we're just human like everyone else, right? And we're not perfect all the time. And even though you put us in this, on this pedestal, we still struggle.
We do.
And so that's important, I think, for the young attorneys to understand as well. So how do you balance your legal profession and work and your mental health? So I know that you talked about how you opened your own firm. So how do you balance that when you're in the messy middle or even doing your stuff in your day-to-day routine to make sure you're taking care of your mental health while you're taking care of your clients?
So this has been a journey that I am still on. But making sure I block off time for working out, making sure I block off time. So, for example, I do have a lot of anxiety around the beginning of school. Part of that is because, the move from working the city of Dallas out to the suburbs was right before school. The move from South Lake to North Dakota was right before school. And then I had another right before school move when I moved my kids back here. So there's these anniversaries that have this kind of mental echo. Yes.
We all have triggers, right? So,
yes.
Yeah.
So last year, after having a difficult time around the beginning of school, I set a reminder in my phone to block off time around the beginning of school for this year. So I have blocked off 5 days. It's vacation. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just taking care of myself.
Oh, I like it.
So, and then when I was having that episode back in July, I took a couple of days, and I feel like we have to treat it just like physical illness. Are you going to push yourself to work through pneumonia?
Right.
When you're just going to get worse and worse and worse? No. So I feel like you just have to prioritize it that way. It's one of the reasons I love being my own boss.
I was about to say it's easier. It's easier when you're on your boss, when you're your own boss. But I mean, even in the law firm context, if there's anything I want the law firms to take away from all of this, is it's important to recognize that saying I need a mental health day is a sign of immense strength.
Yes.
And the law firms need to honor that.
Yes.
Because people do need to step away. We are in a very stressful position, our profession. And, I'll say this too, is that I love my job like you do. And I'm a litigator. So it's, at times it can be very hairy, but I still have to step away.
Sure.
And so I hope that if anything, law firms will understand when to recognize that people do need to step away, or maybe offering someone that is not answering emails or not getting their time in or not coming into the office. What's going on? Let's talk. What can I do to help you? I've had those conversations over the years, and I've never had anybody really ever say, leave me alone.
Right.
They always say, thank you for recognizing this, right? And offering some assistance. So hopefully the law firms will do that. But for you, the solo practitioner, it's very easy, right?
It is. I will say, though, that I was on the board of the Austin Bar's solo and small law firm section. And I feel like in that network, yes, we have more flexibility, but also if we're not recognizing those needs, that can get dangerous. So there were a couple of times when I reached out to colleagues that were solo practitioners. And like you said, no one ever says like, why are you talking to me? Even if, oh, well, I'm just, this is what's going on. I'm having, my computer broke and I can't respond to emails. But just to say, hey, I noticed that, I haven't heard from you as often or didn't get a response. Just checking in, that can be really important, even if you're not in a law firm setting, but just colleague to colleague.
And that's why it's important to have community.
Yes.
So that people understand or people can recognize when something's, maybe not right and help lift you back up. So what do you do? Because, the work can sometimes be put on hold and clients, you can put an out of office memo. But what do you do as a mom?
That is tough. I will say, this may be controversial, but one of the benefits...
Oh, that makes the podcast juicy.
Woo, one of the benefits to having 50-50 custody is, as much as it's hard to not have my kids with me all the time, I have built-in breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've kind of, gotten into that cycle where even if I'm having a hard time, I know, okay, well, it's just going to be for the next 2 days or the next 5 days, depending on our schedule,
right.
And then on the days when the kids are at their dad's house, I
recharge.
I recharge. I'm not good at sleeping. I know sleeping is really important for mental health. Sleeping through the night is tough for me. I am really good at naps, and I will take lots and lots of naps when they're at their dad's house. But I feel like it's one of those things where you have a certain amount of energy. We all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're feeling depressed or anxious, it's less. So you're just having to kind of budget, where am I going to put that effort in? It makes such a difference to have a spouse who understands and who can step up.
Mm-hmm. And then it also, not just a spouse, but a coworker or a friend or whoever that you can call and say, I just need to talk.
Yes.
Or can you take the kids?
Yes.
I need
come
a nap.
hang out at my house for a while?
Yeah.
And that's so true, because I know not everybody has that support in their own home.
I think we talked about this a little bit, but I just want to make sure it's clear. What advice would you give to someone, especially an attorney who's struggling silently?
So I've said this a lot, but just to say it again, you are not alone. You are not alone. There's so many of us who have been through this and who are going through this. And also, it feels nearly impossible sometimes to ask for help. It feels nearly impossible to go to a friend or to approach your doctor.
Or call TLAP.
It feels like climbing a mountain. And one thing I want to encourage people who are looking at that mountain thinking, I can't do it, to think about is, you are living hard now. You are just getting up, just doing what you're doing. You think that you're running the same race that all of these other people are running. You don't see the invisible but very real weights that are holding you down. And you are still breathing, moving, feeding yourself, maybe not as often as you should, or maybe more than you should, brushing your teeth every once in a while. It's impossibly hard. So you are already doing something that's really, really hard. This is a different hard. It's hard, but it's a different hard. So, take it in little steps. Like what I did was I made the doctor's appointment, and I told myself, at this appointment, my only job is to say, I think I might be depressed. And then I got there, and that was the only thing that I had to say. So
make it easy.
Yeah. So whatever it takes. And if it means reaching out to somebody and saying, I think I need to call TLAB, or I think I need to ask for help, but I don't feel like I can do it. Can you do it for me? Just find a way to do it. But recognize that you might feel like you're weaker than everyone else, or you're not being successful at life. You are doing the impossible every single minute already.
And you're human.
Yes.
And this is normal.
It is.
It's so normal.
It is.
And then for as much as it is to say, I need help, there are so many people who want to help.
Yes.
I mean, that's why you're here today. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why TLAP is there. That's why Matt Kidfun is there. There's so many people who will stop what they're doing and immediately say, can I help you? Or what can I do to help? Or just do,
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because we want you to be here.
Yes.
We need you.
Is there anything else you want to talk about, about your journey or your fears or your kind of wellness that you found that you haven't already shared?
So there is just one other thing, which I think has been really helpful to me as I learn how to live with depression and anxiety. But I feel was not something I knew anything about until maybe a few years ago. And that is, two connected things. One is we are not our thoughts or our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like as lawyers, we know language is really important, and we confuse these things. We say, I am hungry, I am tired, I am sad, I am happy. That's not who you are. That's how you're feeling. And those are distinct things. Who you are is your personality, your character, your values, your core, not these feelings that are floating by and through you. And same thing with thoughts. These thoughts kind of float through you. So that's one thing. But the other thing is that's not to say that we should ignore our thoughts and feelings, because I feel like especially those uncomfortable, bad feelings are often sending us messages. Mm-hmm. I feel angry because someone's crossing a boundary, for example. I feel sad because, something that's out of alignment with my values is happening. So to find that separation between who you are and your thoughts and feelings, and then also to pay attention to those thoughts and feelings, especially the uncomfortable ones, the ones you want to push away, the ones you want to drink away. Mm-hmm. Those are really important.
I agree. And, you talked earlier about accountability partners. Find somebody that can gut check you and your feelings. Share those with somebody, and sometimes just saying out loud will help you realize, well, that's probably not true, or, you know what I mean? And I think particular lawyers suffer, the imposter syndrome. So
oh my goodness,
we're bad at very negative self-talk.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, Eileen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Sure.
I really enjoyed this time talking to you and getting to know you. And my goal this year with this podcast and with this initiative is at the end of the year, if we've saved one life, we've done our job.
Yes, I think that's beautiful. And like I said, I'm so, so glad y'all are doing this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you around the bar in the future.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.